Hello, Pam and Shelly. How you doing?
Hey, good.
Hey, great. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, here we go. All right, so today, folks, we have Pam Lanhart and Shelly Young joining us on the show. Pam and Shelly are mothers of sons that are in recovery and are changing the way families interact with their loved ones. They promote a loving, compassionate response to those impacted by substance use. They both found their way to family recovery through non-traditional pathways. It wasn't Al-Anon for either of them. They both sought out spiritual guidance and therapeutic interventions. The recovery was more in accordance with the 8 dimensions of wellness. That is part of what drew them together. Now they are determined to help families heal. That sound about right?
Yep, that sounds like you got it pretty much down.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Pam, for sending me that intro. Appreciate it. All right, rock and roll. So there's definitely a lot that I want to dive into with you ladies, especially about these 8 dimensions of wellness. Now, when you talk about the 8 dimensions of wellness, is that something that you two came up with, or is that a particular pathway that you discovered?
Well, the 8 dimensions of wellness are maybe SAMHSA has it out there. Lots of coaches use it, but it's like the wheel of fortune, right?
Okay. So then,
So
I got you. The wheel of
it's all
life.
the same. Yeah, the wheel of life, or the 8 dimensions of wellness, or compassion pie, whatever you want to call it. It's all the ways of taking care of yourself.
Okay.
And
All right.
yeah, I think for both of us, you know what, and I'll speak for myself. So I have a son who started using when he was 15. He's 21 now. And he wasn't really wanting to do the traditional 12 steps, especially at 15, 16, 17 years old. It's kind of a hard concept to grasp.
Totally.
And so we were trying to figure out how could we support him in his recovery. And I didn't really understand it until I went through a peer recovery coaching program. You met my dear recovery Sherpa, Chris Kelly.
I love
Shout
her.
out Chris and Minnesota Recovery Connections and what they do. But what I realized was that oftentimes when people are chronically relapsing or really struggling in their recovery,
Yes.
there's a piece of that pie or a couple pieces of the pie that might be missing. And so for me, it really helped me identify that, like, okay, maybe he doesn't want to do community through the 12 steps, but that might be a piece that's missing. Or if he doesn't want to do spirituality the way that we do it, or go to the church we go to, how can he incorporate spirituality into his recovery? And more importantly, now that Shelly and I both work with families, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but our mantra is we're not going to ask a family or we're not going to ask a person in recovery to do something that a family member isn't willing to do. So when we work with families, we can use that 8 dimensions of wellness as a guide to find out for the family what pieces of that pie are they missing.
Or where there might be deficiencies. So for our family, I recognize that just emotional regulation or finding peace in our own family, if you look at all the different things, then where am I not being fulfilled in those things, which could lead to my health and wellness, which then I can look at my loved ones and say, okay, are there any pieces of what, is really a healthy life that needs an infusion, right? That needs an infusion.
Okay. All right.
The big ha-ha is always like, when one of those pieces are missing, and then typically we're looking to have that filled by another person, right? So oftentimes that can lead to a situation where I'm looking for my emotional fulfillment in that person getting well rather than, where it really needs to be, which might be the spiritual component, or it might be this my own trauma or whatever it is. So
Okay, and we'll dive a little bit further into that, because there's just based on this on the intro, I had other questions, but before we dive into all that, I'm curious as to what is so funny, Shelly.
Something happened in the background, and I'm trying not to lose my composure.
Something funny?
It wasn't really funny, but the person thought it was funny, and the person's laughing about it. So I suppose they're okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Could that be your son?
No,
Okay. Daughter. Okay. All right. So we got kids in the background wreaking havoc. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. I just saw that and I'm like, what's going on?
I'm like,
Inquiring.
oh my goodness. No.
I think I have an idea what's going on over there. See the beauty of video. All right. So I like to start out with understanding a little bit about where you're at today. So there's this journey that we're going to get into, but there's things that you guys do today to maintain a routine. So what is your daily routine maintenance that you do for your own recovery? What does that look like? Pam, you go first.
Yeah, so I consider myself a person in long-term recovery from the effects of the disease of substance use disorder. And so for me, there's a lot of things that I really try to do. I exercise, regularly. I've had a couple of surgeries, so I'm not as good about that as I was 2 or 3 years ago. But it's part of my regular routine. I take walks, I get outside, I, love nature. My husband and I do fun activities together. I think for me, having spiritual meditation time in the morning is probably the first and most important thing that I do, and I schedule that in every single day. That's how I start my day, that and coffee. I'm like, coffee and Jesus, it's perfect.
I could name that episode Coffee and Jesus. That's the best thing I've ever heard.
So that's kind of how I start my day. And then for me, it's, financial wellness, which is how can we make sure that we're taking care of our family and that we're keeping our head above water financially. I do therapy with a therapist, and that's another piece of my recovery. And, those are probably the really key components. And then the other thing for me is I'm married. And so taking time to invest in my relationships with my husband and with my other children, that was really an important piece of our story, which is, we have 4 children in our family, and I'm married 38 years. I want to stay married 39 years, right? So like making sure that I'm investing in the relationships that are the most important in my life, which is God first, my husband second, and the rest of my kids. And I have 4 of them, not just one. And so for me, that's how can I be the mom that my children need me to be? And that's really personal and really individual. Every single one of them is very different. So.
No, for sure. Real quick, I'm very curious about your financial wellness. Okay. So when I'm talking about daily routine, I'm like, so this is your daily routine. Is this part of your daily routine?
No, daily.
Or weekly?
Yeah, more weekly. Like, how are we doing? What are we spending our money on? Are we above
Budget?
water? So I think people forget about financial wellness when they talk about recovery. And that's something, especially as a family impacted, that can really be significant, and it can really cause contention, right, between a husband and a wife. What are we spending our money on? And so I think that for us, just checking in and being accountable, and I have a little budget app that I use that I kind of keep track of things so that I don't go off the rails. And it's been a big deal lately because we had a wedding on Saturday, and so our financial pie was pretty, Like that, there was a pretty big piece cut out of that, but it's okay. It was for a good reason.
What's the budget app?
I think it's just called Budget. I'll have to look. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah,
one.
get back to me on that. This is super important, right? For most people, they don't dive into that as much as they, especially not even on a daily or weekly basis, having that conversation with their spouse as far as how you're managing your money, what the expenses are, what does the end of the month look like, where are we at right now? I think it's very important, and also it's a delicate topic because people, the money topic is always so delicate. So anyway, that's why I was curious as to how you manage that. So Shelly, tell us about your daily routine. What does that look like?
Well, I get up every morning and the first thing I do is brush my teeth, and then I light candles and I say the meta prayer, that may I be well, happy and peaceful, may no harm come to me, may no difficulties come to me, may I have no problems, may I always meet with success. I also have patience, perseverance, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable obstacles in life. And I say that for myself. I say it for my children. I say it for my friends and family. And then I say it for all. And there's a couple other prayer things I say. And then I get my kids off to school and I spend a good hour with the journal and my dog and the birds, and then every day I walk out in nature with my dog, and I have designated time. So I don't get onto any social media till after that. So I won't check my phone. I won't respond to anything. It's usually around 8:00 before I'll check in with anything, but sometimes a little bit later. If I go to yoga, then it's even later. So yoga would be in the morning after that. And if I don't go to yoga, I do yoga at home. It's a really, really important part of my well-being, and it was part of my recovery practices, and so it stayed in there. And then I meditate. I have a therapist that I work with, and we have a meditation that I practice on purpose that has to do with some trauma resolution. So that goes in with it. And then like Pam, I also have a financial recovery practice. Addiction took a big toll on our financial life, right? We were very privileged to be able to pay for high quality treatment for my son, but it had an impact. And when you're in a state of emergency, you tend to be in a state of emergency with all of your things. And money was one of them. So I went through a financial recovery program called Financial Recovery, who the woman who created it was in recovery, and she applied recovery principles to her money. And she wrote a book. It's called Financial Recovery. And then I have a money program called Money Minder, and I check in with it at least once a week, and it tracks everything. And I put together a spending plan, not a budget, but a spending plan for the month, every month. And then weekly, I check in with it. And then I check in with her. She's a coach weekly or twice a month. And she's helped with my getting my business organized also financially. So I think financial health is super important in the grand scheme of recovery, because it's one of like your primal needs. So safe, secure housing, a way to meet your basic needs, food, shelter, all those things. So I think it's really important. So that's one of my routine practices. And then we always have dinner together as many times a week as we possibly can. I have 2 younger daughters at home, and it's really important to get sleep. I make sure that I have really good sleeping patterns. I think that sleep is one of the number one deficits for families and for the individuals, and it's one of the biggest emotionally regulating things you can do for your body. So it's something I always check in with families, like, how's your sleep? And so that we can see if we can get sleep regulated, we can get a lot regulated from that basis. And drink tons of water. So I have like the really basics. How are you sleeping? How much water are you drinking? What are you putting in your body for food? How are you moving your body? And then what's your spiritual practice? Like, those are like my top things. And then second layer would be like financial, relationship, community. I used to do a thing where I would make sure I checked in with 5 people a day, just like 5 friends or whatever. And I didn't even know that was something they did in the 12-step community. I just had a little thing like, did you talk to 5 people today? You know?
Shelly, you are very busy.
No, full. It's just full. I don't associate with the word busy so much as like, you know, that's just how I roll. And right?
But, kind of to that point though, and I'm glad you brought up the water and the food, because that's a really huge part of my daily discipline, is what I eat and what I drink, or what I don't drink, because I think both Shelly and I don't really drink, even though neither one of us would identify as having had problematic drinking. But the point is that when you practice all of these things and you're taking good care of your body and you're getting good sleep and you're well nourished, then you can run hard, right? Then you do have to get up and go and do the things that are pretty demanding. I mean, I think both of us, Shelly and I, would kind of identify as first responders and caregivers. You know, yeah. We have a lot of people that reach out to us that really are in crisis and need support emotionally and need guidance. And so, man, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we cannot take care of anybody else, right?
Correct. And that's very important in the sense of that energy that's coming your way. So you've got, as a first responder, you've got lots of very intense, in many cases could be toxic, could be, just emotionally intense feelings. And so what you're saying here is, based on your practices, based on sleep, water, food, right? Meditation, like what I'm doing is preparing me for this. So what comes my way does not drain me.
Right. We know how to respond in a crisis because we're strengthened by these practices, right? We're able to hold space for people and others because we are grounded, and we have these practices where spiritual, physical, emotional, mental practices and they're not things that we are depriving ourselves of other things for. They're enhancing our lives, you know?
Yes.
It's not like we're putting on a suit of armor. We're actually just strong because of those things. That doesn't mean we don't get tired and we don't, need comfort and support and practices for when those toxic vibes hit us. Like, I soak myself in a salt bath a couple times a week and smudge my house, but we're prepared.
Well, and we check in with each other we're in constant communication with one another. We've become quite a good support for one another, because I think that, in some ways I think of the word chaplaincy, or the therapist needs a therapist for therapists, right? And so, I think we check in with each other, and Shelly's really intuitive when I'm struggling emotionally, because not only, we still got our own stuff, right? We got our own family, we got our own emotions going on. Yesterday, my son was in town for the wedding and had to leave and go back to Colorado, and I was a mess. This morning we spent, 20 minutes just like kind of processing through that. And so having support for ourselves is part of that daily practice. And it's critical when you're, I mean, no matter what layers of service that you're doing for other people, you know, when you're giving, you can't, I mean, it's very cliche-ish, but you can't give from an empty cup. You can't give out of an empty well. And so, you know, like Omar, to your point, what are we doing to fill our well every day? And part of that is our connection with one another and our making sure that we're checking in emotionally.
Okay, so it's super important. And the reason why I didn't want to just kind of gloss over it is because for many of us, there is this, even me, you know, like that being drained. Okay, there's moments, there's certain, like sometimes I'm running hard and I'm in a flow, right? Like nothing can stop me, right? I can handle client after client, right? Do podcast interviews, right? Like everything is like, bring it on. And then there's certain weeks where I want to hide under a blanket and you know what I mean? And just kind of like disappear and everything is daunting and everything is draining me. And I don't know how to get back. And then it's like, oh, well, your morning routine's off and your exercise routine's off and you haven't been drinking enough water. And then all of a sudden I go, but that couldn't be it. Mm-hmm. And then like I'm here, I'm listening to two warriors and it's like, okay, there's the answer. There's the answer right in front of my face. And it doesn't, you can't skirt it, especially when it's such a strong part of what you do on a daily basis. It's like, and also like, if we're not doing this, then at some point we're going to get hit with something that we can't deal with. We're not going to be physically, mentally, emotionally able to deal with someone coming at us as a first responder if I haven't taken the time out to prepare mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
Well, right. I think just to piggyback on that just a little bit too is the intuitiveness of self-awareness and then self-compassion. You know, I think that has to be part of your daily practice. Like, it's okay to not be okay once in a while. If you know you need that downtime and you're listening to your body, you take it and you say no in other areas of your life in order to find that balance. So if I had a pretty rough emotionally day, you know, exhausting day, then I know I need to, and it's okay. Like, it's really okay to say, I'm not okay today and I need some time, and then figuring out what that is and just giving yourself permission. I think that's really a strong part of what both of us do, is just giving ourselves permission to breathe and decompress and take time.
And rest.
And rest.
Yes.
And relax, you know?
Yeah, and you also have each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a full, like, everything here is, you've got the full package where I've got connection, I've got communication, I've got a support, I've got practice, I've got strategy. I mean, I've got everything that I've kind of built into this. So that's where we're at today. Okay, so here's Pam and Shelly, recovery warriors. Okay, after what they've been through. So let's kind of dive into what that looked like to get here. So I'm not sure which one of you guys wants to go first, but one of the questions that I ask, and this is it, you know, it's like addiction can be a driving force for many of us. It may propel us towards things like drugs, alcohol, food, money, success, even our phone. So addiction plays a role in our lives in so many different ways. Or it could affect our family members, right? So my question is, how has addiction played a role in your life, and what has it cost you? And who wants to go first?
May I?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a daughter of my mother had alcohol use disorder until 2 years before she passed away, which was 5 years ago. And my grandmother also passed away from alcohol use disorder. My grandfather, probably the same. And my son is almost 4 years in recovery. My mom was the first person in the family that anybody ever recognized that there was actually a problem and addressed it and got treatment for it, which happened 14 years ago. And I was the one that initiated it as her daughter. And I just had a baby. But no one had ever done that before. No one had ever said, this is not okay. This is really looks scary and a problem, and you're sick. And this is what people do when you're sick like this. So she went into a treatment program. She did not get sober for 7 years after that. And then we had another one of those episodes where we just were like, this is not okay. This is scary. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so because we started actually treating addiction in our family as a health condition, it was easier when it really flared up with my son after some really serious traumatic incidents in his life, which I completely understood why he was using substances the way he was using them. It just was really difficult to get to him while he was get to his soul while he was under the influence. So we kept attempting to get proper care and treatment and intervene in different ways. So with him, we ended up after about 4.5 years of just episode after episode after episode, and one 30-day treatment episode that didn't result in long-term recovery, but at least opened the door for the discussion. We had an intervention, which I thought was the most traumatic thing ever in our family, and I don't recommend that kind of intervention. And because of that intervention, I became an interventionist, or I got trained in intervention. So I don't do intervention the way most people do intervention, but like Pam would tell you, like just sitting down at the table and having a conversation is an intervention. So that being said, we initiated treatment for him, but prior to that, I had sought support for myself, and I hated the way that I felt, and I didn't really know, how we were going to change that. And so I ended up working with a spiritual coach. And during that time, those practices, I feel like strengthened me enough to really be able to confront with a compassionate, loving response, addiction in our family, and really change the way that we treated it, and get him the proper care and treatment that he needed at the time. And the other thing it did, it helped me zero in on okay, my daughter's best friend had a brain tumor at the same time that my son was sick. And the way that the community responded to their family was different than the way that they responded to us, because number one, they didn't really know what was going on with us. They just knew that my son was, having problematic behavior. And that he'd been traumatized by the loss of 2 very close friends, not drug related. But I looked at him and I just thought, you know what? I'm going to treat him the same way my friend Lisa's treating her daughter with the brain tumor. He has a disorder to his brain. So how do you respond to that, to someone with a health condition? And I started treating him like that. And then I asked my community, can you guys treat us the same way? Can you guys put us in the prayer circle? Can you guys help me with my younger kids? Can you guys help me? And they did. And they did. And they rallied, and that's making me a little emotional.
Bring it on.
They became his biggest encouragers. They celebrated his milestones. They were there for him. They said, we love you. And I think that's what made such a huge difference, is they embraced us and supported us. And I needed that support so that I could be a better support for him. So that's why we're so passionate about a loving response to someone with substance use disorder, or a loving community response, because it makes a huge difference. And I know that connection is the medicine for addiction. So if we're isolating people, we're not going to help them. We're not going to help them get well. So prior to where I am right now, I learned these recovery practices and then implemented them it just really rippled out into my family and then into my community.
I'd love to know a little bit more about, okay, so the community, when you talk about your community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy for us, like when I identify and I say, well, my 12-step, my AA community, my AA, my NA group, right? But when you talk about your community, is there a specific name for it? How does that, what does that look like? What does that sound?
Just my neighborhood. It
your
was like
neighborhood.
In my neighborhood. And, when I got sick one time, when like someone has a baby,
Incredible.
Everybody brings food. And when my daughter's friend had the tumor or the brain cancer and she was going through treatment, we went every Friday to one of the neighbors' house before school with all the kids and the families and said the rosary and then had breakfast together for her and her family. And so then they added my son's name to that. And so we were part of that. And
wow.
Then when we had the intervention, people brought food. And when my son had a seizure and people brought food. And during the intervention, another friend took care of my other kids. So they just show up, right? They're just there and they help. And so it's my neighbors, my kids' friends' parents, my friends.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah. Because you can't, there's nowhere to point, right? Because, not everyone's going to have that opportunity. Right. Like I don't even know
I've
been here for 6 years. I don't know my neighbors. Right. Yeah. So I'm one of those.
So after today, you're going to go out.
Yeah. I don't know all my neighbors, but they're like, we're connected through our children, right? So we have. And
is it through your children or is it also through your church?
Children.
Just the children. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't have a church community. Like I have a different spiritual practice for worship, but and sacred time, but so it's the people we spend all the time with on the fields and in the bleachers and at the school volunteering together.
Totally makes sense. So they rallied together. This was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So they rallied together. You asked them to pray for your son.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? Like at that point when they started, because now he's 4 years in recovery and I'm assuming he's doing well.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Fantastic. So what was that like? I guess there was like a turning point in there at some point where you guys are like, hey guys, I need your help here. I need you to add my son into this prayer circle. When did you start seeing something happen with him?
I think with him and with me, as I felt more supported, I was able to it regulated me emotionally. So that when I was able to be stronger in my response, but not strong like tough, like strong like we got to do this, and this is. I was able to be more honest, and then, this is everybody knows, right? Everybody knows this is not a secret. We're talking about this, and everybody loves you, and they want to support you. So, you're in. Would you like to come to Rosary? You know what I mean? And then, they sent him cards, and they some of them still send him cards, and whenever there's a milestone celebration, they all reach out to him and text and Facebook message and all that. Yeah.
The power of encouragement.
Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. I love it. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for that beautiful story, Shelly. So now, Pam, same question. How has addiction affected your life? And what does it cost you?
Yeah. So, similarly, my parents were had substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder. My dad, I just don't really have many memories of him sober, and my home was very chaotic. Everything sort of centered around alcohol, like every event, every activity, everything. But there was definitely trauma in my life as a result of my dad's drinking. I mean, significant stuff that we've had to work through some good therapy. My mom, so my parents got divorced when I was 13, and we did an intervention with my mom when I was 17, and she went through treatment. And she moderately drinks now. My dad died when I was 27. He was 51. And really, he died from the effects of the alcoholism. He died from a brain aneurysm that they're very sure was from the drinking. So my story is kind of departs, and I have a sister who struggled for years as well. So just like Shelly, strong family history, genetic predisposition. I mean, we had 5 siblings, 3 of them have struggled with some sort of use disorder. 2 of us just got lucky. I just say we were just the lucky ones because, of course, I drink like everybody else. But then as I was married and getting ready to have my own kids, I really thought that I could break this cycle, right? And what I didn't realize is how I actually brought it into my own family. I wasn't drinking, but there were manifestations of the effects of the alcoholism that played out in my own life, and just my identity being in how our family looked, or over controlling behaviors, or ultimately just being really triggered by things that maybe I shouldn't have been triggered by. So but we had a strong faith. We went to church every Sunday. We did all the family dinners. We went camping. Our kids did super fun activities. Like, we would do really extreme fun activities. Like, my husband would take them on the mountain and, climb with them. We mountain biked. My son did MMA. I mean, we just really tried to be like those parents that were like, we're just going to have fun with our kids and try to balance, all of this. And I think we're, overall, we were like pretty good parents. I don't think, my son's been in lots of therapy, and he wouldn't say there was anything super traumatic in his life, but he would say he always felt different. He always felt different from out of the womb. And he said when he used for the first time, which was probably around 11, and of course he had Adderall, so that potentially could have triggered his addiction, but he would say he would identify that with smoking pot, and he would say the first time I used, I felt normal, and he felt like he fit in. And I think his ADHD brain kind of caused him to feel a little bit different. I also think, we were in a pretty conservative church, and he was sort of the naughty boy, so he was non-conforming to what everybody else, all the other kids I'm sure looked really perfect, even though obviously we know that's not true. But he was just a naughty boy. And now looking back, I'm like, well, we kind of propagated that label. And I'm sorry to say that we did. But so at 13, we got a call from school that he had brought a backpack full of pills to school. And by 15, he went through his first treatment. And our home was in complete chaos during those years. And I have a book, a devotional book called Praying Our Loved One Home. And I write about the summer that he turned 16. And I call it the Summer of Brokenness, which was literally like feeling the most powerless anybody could ever feel. Because in our state, if you're 15 years old, you can AMA out of a treatment program. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. And yet, obviously, he was in our home and he held a lot of power, and there was a lot of chaos because he knew there wasn't a lot that we could do at that point. And so this is where my story kind of gets pretty emotional for me, because I remember that fall sitting with a pastor, a person that was guiding us through this, and we were like, we thought he was going to die, and we didn't know how to manage all of this, and he looked at us and he said, are you going to be right for the sake of justice, or are you going to love for the sake of relationship? Because love never fails.
Amen.
And there was a difference between saying you love someone and acting and being in a place of love, in a place of peace. And one of my favorite things to talk about with families when I work with them is stepping out of the cycle of chaos, right? Because we were so worried about being right, and we needed to be worried about loving right. And so it was during that time that things shifted in our home from being right to loving right. And, there were three things that kind of guided us during that time. And one was, if he wanted to get sober, would he want to have a relationship with us? Right? Would we, and then are we going to love right instead of be right? And the third one, which I know this sounds really sad, but the truth is that, if he died today, what would that last interaction have been like, right? That was so important to us that, our God was a God of love, right? That's what we wanted to exemplify. And more than anything, we moved from a place of like, would he know that he was radically loved? Radically loved, that there was no judgment, that he was just loved, right? And we have put all kinds of judgment on addiction because we grew up in a church that was pretty, legalistic about that kind of stuff. And, and even in his treatments, and they were 12-step based, but it was like, you wake up every morning and you call yourself an addict. And so we were propagating this identity at 15 or 16 that he was his disease. And we knew that if we were going to have a relationship with him, we had to step out of that. Like our identity became him getting well, and his identity became his disease. And all that did was dehumanize everyone. And honestly, it was really when we started working with the chronically mentally ill and homeless, and we did a lot of mission trips, even to Costa Rica and where you're at. And, it was like understanding human value and understanding that God loves the person that is riding the bus 24 hours a day because he has nowhere to live, and the person who eats mud, they were born in poverty, as much as he loves me and my son. And if he can love everybody, I can love everybody. I can see their value, right? And so there was just a really huge shift in our hearts. And I think that's, there was a transformation, spiritual transformation that took place during that time, which was that we would lose our son if we kept putting judgment on him.
So that's because this is a tricky thing. This is the tricky thing. You pour, and the idea is to genuinely pour unconditional love onto the fire. So, taking away that judgment or any sort of preconceived notions of what you think you know or what you feel is right, just based on so many different facets. But then you pour love on this, right? And recognizing that once drug addiction takes a hold of you, and you're kind of in that cycle, that there could be a moment where that gets taken advantage of.
Mhm.
Okay. So keeping that in mind, and maybe the fact that he was so young kind of helped too. But where did that shift happen? And I'm not even sure how much resistance there was. Like how much resistance there was between you and your husband and your son, like between the two of you guys and your son when this was all going on. How much resistance was he pushing against?
Mhm.
Right? And when you went to the church and asked for help, and he gave you that counsel, right? What was the significant shifts that you saw based on your own change when you started to change? Like how quickly did he start to adapt to that?
Well, first of all, and I kind of coined a phrase called loving well, from tough love to loving well. And it's what I had to do in my mind in order to shift. Loving well doesn't mean not being safe or not setting boundaries. And we had,
Okay.
He's moving through treatments and drug court and lots of different stuff going on there. Literally 3 weeks after he graduated drug court, right before his 18th birthday, he started using again. And so what that looked like for us, and, I might do it a little bit different this time around, but, we got to the point where we were like, we can't change you. We know that this has to be something you decide. And what we support is for you to get help. And if you don't choose help, you're not going to be able to live in our home. We had minor children. He was bringing drugs into our home. And so thankfully he did. He's been through a few rounds of treatment since he turned 18. And he did choose. There were times when he didn't make that choice right away and he was out and using. But it was really interesting because he always gravitated back to us. Like he would always come back and, there were times when we would actually, because he didn't have a driver's license, we'd pick him up for work and bring him to work knowing that he was using, but we wanted the 20 minutes in the car to connect with him. And there were times when he didn't talk much or he talked goofy. And what that looked like is we didn't call him out on it. We knew that there would be a time and a place for that discussion, but we were very judicious about the conversation. We were really super careful about how those conversations went down. So we got to the point where we would interact with him even when we knew that he was using without confronting him because it just wasn't the right time. And in fact, I'll just give you an example of the most recent relapse he had. He's getting really close to being done. He's back in a program now, a highly structured program, and I really think that this is probably his last time. But the last time he relapsed, there was a day I spent the whole day with him in Sedona. I loved on him. We went out to dinner. We interacted. I didn't confront him. I went home. I was in the airport the next day, and he called me and said, I need detox. And I think because we made our family a safe place for him, the times that he has come to us and told us that he was using, we didn't judge that. It was like Shelly said, this is a medical, in my mind, this is a medical thing. And so not putting failure on them, realizing that they're not bad, they're sick, interacting in a way that's like, okay, thanks for sharing that. That was really brave. Let's talk about what our next options are. What do you want to do? And so I've always been there. And when he was younger, he could be kind of mean. He hasn't been that way for a few years. And I feel like it's because we interact with him in a way that just values him as a human being. So he doesn't have to be mean.
Have you? Go ahead. Sorry, Shelly.
I feel like what Pam has done in her family with Jake is they've created not only a safe home, like their home is a safe place for him, but their relationship is a safe container, right? It's always a safe container. And every time they connect, they're not always connecting over what's wrong with him or addiction. They're just continuing to build that bond and continuing to strengthen it so that he knows no matter what, we have your back. We have limits. We have limits that, you know, about how we can move and be, but this is your family is a safe, secure place, and it's always going to be that way.
And I think that's because we work our own recovery program. You know, we're modeling recovery. We've had to learn how to communicate. And that was a big thing. There, you can imagine in my family of origin, there was no communication. I mean, we didn't talk. We just yelled and screamed and, you know, accused one another. And so we had to learn how to take phrases like you need to, you should, and you would, and change statements to questions, right? And listen and reflect. And then, you know, we don't really drink, you know, and so we're sober, and that reflects we can make good decisions and we can make good choices. And, you know, thankfully, and not that we didn't have some triangulation in our family, there certainly were times when Jake, you know, would try to manipulate and play the husband and the wife relationship, right? I mean, certainly that happened. And I remember one time that happening and me sitting down with my husband, because we were kind of in conflict at that point. And I looked at him and I said, you are not the enemy, and I am not the enemy. And we are not going to fight each other. We are going to be a team to fight the addiction. That is the enemy. And so I think just investing in that relationship with each other and sitting and communicating. So all the skills we've learned, you know, to communicate with Jake apply to all of our other kids. You know, my relationship with our young daughter is radically different than it was 4 years ago.
So what it's recognizing the need to remove shaming language from the vocabulary, you know, and incorporating questions instead of coming at him, setting strong boundaries. So did you find that you were unwavering about the boundaries that you set? Were you able to stand firm on the boundaries that you set with him, Pam?
Sometimes.
Thank you for the honesty.
You know, I like the word grace, right? You know, I think that there's a learning curve with all this. We just learned, you know, we're not going to threaten, right? I think a lot of people think boundaries are threats, or that threats are boundaries, and they're the same thing. And they'll say things like, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to kick you out, right? I hate that word.
But that's more of an ultimatum.
Well, yeah.
Than a boundary. It sounded like in the beginning you'd set this, hey, listen, we love you, but if you're going to continue to use, we've got other kids in the house. You can't.
Well, that wasn't the beginning, though. That was kind of as we got better
at some point. Probably more in the beginning of your own recovery.
Yeah. But I think, you know, boundaries, like Shelly uses the word agreements, and we'll maybe talk about that in a minute. But I mean, I love the way Brene Brown talks about boundaries. It's like what's not okay and what's okay. So like for me, you know, my son doesn't yell at us anymore. We don't yell at him anymore. That's not okay. Like even I have my own boundaries that I have set for myself, so that, because in the middle of all of this, I realized how horribly triggered I was, how much stuff I had to work through, because as our son's addiction got worse, my reaction to his addiction got worse because of what I had gone through as a child. And so I had to work through a lot of that. But, you know, then putting safety measures in place for myself so that I don't overreact, or so that I don't, you know, end up like saying things that I shouldn't say. And so to me, that's what boundaries are. Like what's not okay and what is okay, or where, safety
For
fences.
me, like what's okay and not okay for me is a boundary. What's not okay and not okay with you is your boundary, right? And we put some agreements in place so that you know what my boundaries are ahead of time, or you know what my limits are ahead of time, and we agree, that we're not going to cross these, and if we do, this is the response that's going to happen.
Correct.
So we talk
Correct.
ahead of time.
Well, here's the important thing, because I'm gonna see what I mean. It's already 55 minutes in. They go a long time because we get into it.
I know it's fun to talk about.
It is. There's so many different facets. Here's the big takeaway. It's an ongoing process. This is something that it's not perfect. It's constant work in progress. And what the big takeaway is how much growth and learning that each of you guys ladies, have implemented in your lives. So it was the idea of, how do I come from a place of strength? Well, I am going to have to do a deep dive into me. I am going to have to do my own recovery. I am going to have to create my own foundation. I am going to have to create my own rituals and routines and connect spiritually on a higher level so that I can come from a place of strength and not only handle things with my own family, but also start, becoming a community leader. So with that being said, I kind of want to segue into what it is that you ladies do today. As a team coming to me and saying, hey, I'd love to talk about what we do. Tell me a little bit about what you guys have put together and how you're helping the recovery community and other parents and people and interventions. Tell us a little bit about how you guys, what you guys are doing, what you ladies are doing.
Well, one of the things that I found when my son was in treatment was that I recognized that addiction flourished in our home and that I had no idea what recovery meant. And so I wanted recovery to flourish in our home. So I grew up in an environment that supported addiction. So I wanted to know how you changed that. So I made it a mission to learn how to create an environment that supported recovery. And while doing that, I connected with a lot of people in recovery, community leaders. That was sweet.
That was my wife. She just got home.
That's nice. So I wanted to know. So I wanted the vision, like, what is recovery? And I went to a big event where there were thousands of people on the mall in DC, and Steven Tyler played and all that. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I have a vision now of what recovery can be. And so I got connected with people in recovery, and I got connected with people in my community. And I created a group for families that was an education type gathering. So I had experts and community members come and speak and educate families on addiction and recovery so that it wasn't just a place of expression where we were just kind of admiring the problem and passing it around in the circle, but instead we were learning actionable solutions and recovery practices, right? And then I was on the production team for the Collegiate Recovery Conference, and I heard these phenomenal speakers, and I thought, I am so lucky that I get to meet these people and I get to know. And I was trained in a family system intervention protocol by Dr. Judith Landau, who's phenomenal teachings on how the family system needs healing, not just the individual, and that this is that if we treat the whole family, then we have better outcomes. And if we are invitational in how we come together, then we have better outcomes. So I had all these people that I met, and they had these phenomenal ways of being. And I knew that it was really hard for families to travel to a conference, much less leave their house for a meeting, because who knows what will happen if they leave. They're scared. So how could we take all this great stuff and bring it right into the living rooms of all the family members? And I had seen Pam on social media, and I knew that her messaging was aligned with mine, and her ideology was aligned with mine. So I said, I have an idea to do an online family recovery conference. Do you want to do that with me? And so we sought out, we just asked people we knew if they would do talks, and they said yes. And so we popped up the first ever online family recovery conference for families, about families, with all the different, nuances. But Pam brought to it just a huge layer of support, because I'll let her tell what she does for families. But I work with families one-on-one. I usually work with a whole family system, not just an individual or not just a parent, but usually we all work together. And then I'm the founder of the Family Recovery Conference, and then I work on the production team for the Collegiate Recovery Conference.
Wow. Incredible. All right. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Pam?
Yeah. So back several years ago, I in my spirit, I knew that I understood that my recovery was not typical, and at the same time, because I didn't go into an Al-Anon group, or I tried, it wasn't a good fit for me for whatever reason. I was like, I felt really isolated and really alone. And then the other thing that happened is that during that time, we were looking for treatment centers and trying to figure out and navigate insurance. And, we Google something and we get an 800 number that was owned by a treatment center. And so there were all these like really horrible predatory practices, and families just didn't know where to go, where to turn. And I envisioned an organization that would support families from a full service perspective. So then I went through the Peer Recovery Coaching Academy, and I was like, this is multiple pathways. Like, families need to feel supported regardless of which way they find their recovery. That kind of typically when you look in these private Facebook groups, the answer is always like, just go to an Al-Anon meeting, just go to an Al-Anon meeting. And there's this whole segment of population that try it, it's not for them, and they have no support, right? None. And so, and I learned a lot of my recovery practices that I work with families on through therapeutic interventions, motivational interviewing, CBT, DBT. Like all the spiritual practices in the world did not give me the skills and languaging that the 4 components of DBT did. And that changed our family. Our whole family had to take DBT because our kids were taking it and we had to take it together. And so I'm like, what if we had this kind of support group model that had a spiritual component, but also this sort of evidence-based topical component? And I put those together and I created a support group model, which we now have 6 of them that meet in Minnesota. We have some online groups, but we also have a helpline, a warm line that people can call that's safe. We don't ever take a dime from treatment centers. We're paid by donations only. And so families can call, and a lot of treatment providers give out our phone number at Thrive because they know it's safe. And so we'll deal with these kind of crisis calls that aren't really crisis, because you call the police or you call crisis and you don't really get help. And I was like, well, I'm a family member who's been through this. I can help support these people. And so we have about 25 trained volunteers now that help answer that phone line, that lead our groups. We do coaching, and then also I do private coaching myself. So, I have some private clients that I work with, and then I'm going to be going through Judas interventionist training, more to just learn family systems and understand that a little bit better. Like Shelly said, we came together and it was just, we were so aligned with our views and everything that we're putting out for messaging. And it's this, like, we don't use typical words that you might hear in family recovery circles. So we don't talk about enabling. We don't talk about codependency. Now we can talk about how sometimes helping can help the addiction flourish, or we can talk about how we can help provide an environment that supports recovery. But, we try to work with families. Parents' natural instinct, a mother's natural instinct is to want to save their child. So how can we take that natural bond between a family member and their kid, a mom and their child, and work within that bond instead of saying, well, you have to detach, you're toxic, you're the enemy, you're causing the problems. How can we take that relationship and go, if we treat the whole family, if we help them learn how to be their loved one's best chance at recovery, all of a sudden one toxic or one healthy plant in a toxic pond, as Shelly would say, can change the whole family, can change the whole ecosystem, right? And so how can we start working to change the dynamic of the family, so instead of working against one another, we can help one another become healthy. And it always starts with us, right? It always starts with the one.
And we want to look at families. So when we were going through this in our family and people were telling me to disconnect, detach, kick him out, use tough love, wait for him to get to rock bottom, wait. I was like, I'm never going to do any of that. Like, I'm never going to kick him out. I'm never going to use tough love. But I am a mother, and my natural mother instinct is to protect my young, to put my life before his, and to protect the rest of my family. I'm strong. I have perseverance. I love, use my strengths. We are incredibly resilient. Use these strengths and tell me another way to do it, because I'm not going to do it that way, right? So what Pam and I are trying to help families understand is they have these strengths that they can use in their favor instead of going against their natural ways of being, right?
Correct. And so what's interesting is, I'm curious as far as what obstacles or more challenges. What challenges you face, because in some aspects the family is not as willing to look at themselves. It's more
you meet
like
them where they are.
Okay.
You meet them where they are, and then you lay the breadcrumb trail for them, right? You start with, okay, this is what's going on, and we both do it. We listen until we can pinpoint like, okay, can we reframe that? Can you, almost like yoga, can you do this pose instead? Can you take 5 breaths? How are you? And then we ask questions like, okay, what is it about that thing? Or we just really dig in, and then they'll start to come down, and we're able to look at it as a bigger picture. Judith teaches us to do a genogram. I do that with all my families, to look at where there are health issues, substance use issues, trauma, grief, losses, mental health issues, and you draw it all out and color code it. You can tell what's happening with a family when you do that. And there is a way that it will all converge into 1 or 2 people, and then it starts to heal. They become the family healers. So if you can orient the family to, this is like some of the ways I'm responding might be contributing to this, and some of the ways they're acting might be contributing to the way I'm acting, and we're interdependent, and that's natural, and attachments are actually fundamental. If we can reorient the families to different ways of being, or orient them to different ways of being, but orient them to what's happening, and show them that there are ways and whys, it really helps.
Well, and Shelly brought up a really good point, and we both do this a lot, and that's looking at patterns one of the things that we have the power to do is to say, like, we've been there and we understand. I didn't want to admit that perhaps the way I was interacting with my son could have contributed, and even when you look at the Al-Anon 3 C's, I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, I can't control it. But the 4th C is, but you can contribute to it. And so even in that, I think almost any family member, when they come to us for help, or they're in a group, right? We're in private Facebook groups, and they're in a group and they're saying, I'm done, I need help. Almost every parent or family member will say, I need help. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know what to do. And so we can say, okay, first and foremost, let's just breathe. Let's take a step back and let's look at a specific situation and what the pattern might be in that situation that might be creating that chaos or creating the environment that might be, devaluing or dehumanizing our loved one, that might be contributing in some way, that might be interacting with them in a way that helps them with their addiction pathology, right? So we know that in addiction, there's a pathological, reward and response system. And so if we're going to, help with the addiction, the first thing we can do is help break the pathology, or that at least the part that we have where we're contributing to it.
Correct. Because what I find in many cases, especially when I'm coaching, is that there is some underlying trauma. There is childhood trauma. And what the alcohol and the drugs do is soothe that trauma. Mm-hmm. So, if I stop using drugs and alcohol because this program taught me how to not use drugs and alcohol, how does that help me with the underlying issue?
Right.
And in some cases, the step work, depending on how involved you get into it, will address some of it. But in many cases, there is an underlying issue that still stays unresolved. And unless that gets resolved, you've always got this chance of a relapse based on being triggered. So
going back to that, I, as a parent, had trauma that created certain behavior patterns in my life.
Correct.
That were also contributing to the environment where the addiction could flourish. And so that's where we talk about don't ask them to do anything we're not willing to do. And if we can recognize that all of us probably have some underlying stuff that needs to get peeled away, and as we start to address that, we change our behavior patterns. And then when we start changing the way we interact with other people, they change their response, and it just ripples. And eventually, we've got an environment where recovery flourishes.
Well, there's no question about it, because you've changed. The most important thing you changed was your language. So how you discuss recovery, how you discuss alcohol, substance abuse disorder versus addiction. So there is this constant change in language that takes a lot of the
shame.
The shame, yeah, the shame and the stigma out of the conversation. So now it moves more into what is, and then looking and addressing how it affects not only them, but how it affects you, how it has affected you, and specific instances where you guys can kind of try and identify a pattern or some other underlying issue that's coming from the parent. So it could be the way that they're trying to communicate with their child is ineffective. Mm-hmm. And you two ladies are able to bridge that gap. Correct?
Yeah. Or spouses. We've got a lot of spouses that come into our groups, and, people are telling them, well, just get divorced, right? Like, you don't have to live this way. And they're like, if they wanted to get a divorce, they wouldn't be in the support group in the first place, right? They don't want to leave. They want to try to figure out if they can change the way that their family dynamic is playing out, and that they might be able to create an environment that supports recovery. And so, I worked with quite a few people that have their whole dynamic in their relationship with their partner or spouse is completely different now. Because, like Gabor Mate says, if you're going to love an addict or alcoholic, just love them. Don't try to change them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I
think the work that we do, the most impactful or most juicy work that we do is that we help people talk to each other. Right?
I love it.
Because the biggest issue is people are not talking about it and just kind of isolating in silence about it, or they're coming at it from a violent way. So we're teaching like nonviolent communication. We're teaching people to open up with questions. We're asking family members, how do you want to feel, right? How do you want to feel in this relationship? And what's causing you not to feel that? Or how do you both want to be in this relationship? Or how do we want the family to be? You're like, what do you want to, how do we want our family to be? Let's collaborate on this. And we're trying to bring people that are like here, back at here, before they decide to go here, right?
I love it. Okay, so listen. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. We talk all day.
We could talk all day. So here's what I want to do. So Thrive, okay, so Thrive is the name of your company. Is that the name of the support group?
It's a nonprofit that encompasses all of those things. So It's called Thrive Family Support, and we have a helpline. We, connect people to resources safely.
This is the project. This is both you and Shelly.
And then Shelly and I, so that's my organization that I have started.
Okay.
Yeah. And then Shelly and I have the Family Recovery Conference together. Okay. And that's what we're doing together.
That's online.
Online, yep. And it's iterating into bigger things. Yeah. But that's in the creation stage right now.
Okay, so before we go any further, if my listeners want to get in touch with you ladies, want to know more about what you offer, okay, Pam, tell me what you offer, and then Shelly, tell me what you have, and how they can get a hold of you.
Right. So I can talk. We have an online Facebook group called Thrive Family Addiction Support.
Okay.
I offer private coaching, which is under my name, PamLanhart.com. And then we have the nonprofit umbrella organization, Thrive Family Support, which is just thrivefamilysupport.org.
Okay. And so if they want to reach out to you, best way is through your website?
Yep.
Okay. Which would be, what's your website again?
Well, thrivefamilysupport.org would be our nonprofit website. And then if they're interested in like coaching or anything like that, it's just PamLanhart.com.
Got it. Okay. And I will list that on the show notes, folks. Okay. Shelly?
You can access the Family Recovery Conference, just like it sounds, the familyrecoveryconference.com. And that's where we have 40 some talks from individual peers, professionals, and innovative thought leaders in the realm of family recovery. And you can email me through that, or you can email me for personal guidance or coaching. Just email Shelly at ShellyLYoung.com.
Okay. All right. Shelly, you don't have your own website yet?
She does.
Things are in creation.
All right.
I don't have a separate website right now. I'm recreating all of it.
All right. Coming soon.
Family Recovery Conference became such a big part of what we do.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay, great. All right. So, folks, if you want to get in touch with Pam or with Shelly. I'll have all their information on the show notes. So just go to the show notes and you'll be able to access that quickly. And then let's answer some closing questions. Are you ladies ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so one at a time. There are, especially as far as, what I'm thinking about, especially when I'm going into this, like before I started my process of recovery, when I'm first faced with the challenge of my child is suffering right now with substance abuse issues, right? So at some point, myself as a coach, right, I hear people all the time, I can't do this because, or once I achieve this, I'll be happy. So it's a set of limiting beliefs or stories that they tell themselves. So I'm curious as to what the limiting beliefs that you had or the stories that you used to tell yourselves, and what are the new stories that you believe now?
I'll start and then Shelly, you can wrap up. My story was that I would be okay if my kids turned out okay. My identity was completely intertwined with my children's success or failure. So the story was, if my children failed, I failed.
And what is the story now?
The story now is, I'm okay. Like, my identity is not whether or not my kids succeed or fail. And my children's identity is not whether or not they follow the path of success that society lays out. That it's far more important for them to be happy, healthy, and spiritually whole than it is for them to be a success in the world's eyes. And so, again, it's relationship and love is more important than being right. And so the story in my head now is like, I'm strong. I'm okay. I'm okay.
And
right?
a lot of times, I'll end up with at some point is having that question that I want my clients to answer, which would be, what does success mean to me? What is my vision of success? Because in many cases, that tells us a lot about, where they're at and how long they've been there.
So for me, the answer to that is that my peace and my joy is not dependent on external circumstances.
Beautiful, beautiful. Love it. Shelly?
So I guess if I drill it down to a substance use or addiction related limiting belief, I used to believe that there was nothing I could do. And that made me feel very powerless. And I don't believe that now at all. I wouldn't even utter the words, cross that out in the name of Jesus. I'm not powerless, but we are powerful. We are powerful, and our thoughts create our reality, and our beliefs create our reality. And our love is a force. It's a force, and we can use it. We can use it for good. And so there are things you can do. There are lots of things you can do, and you are, and together we're even more powerful, right? Together we're even more powerful. So I don't believe in powerlessness, and I don't believe in labels, and I don't believe there's nothing you can do. I believe there's lots you can do.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. So one of the things that one of my favorite examples from Tony Robbins, one of the stories that he tells, is he talks about burning the boats. And I love hearing about people's burning boat moments. So if you want to take the island, you have to burn the boats. So you draw this line in the sand where you say, I'm not one more day, not one more hour, not one more minute. I'm not going to tolerate this in my life anymore. What was that moment for each of you? Shelly, you start us off.
it was a moment that was after my son was in treatment, and somebody reached out to me, and I had received a gift in the mail of like the wine club of the month. And I was like, this has done nothing for my family good ever. And I put all the wine bottles in a container in my backyard, and I wrote on them. I wrote like, I will never be powerless. You will never take my joy, like all these things. And I smashed them with the hammer, and I was like, done. Like, I will never allow a substance to rule my life ever again.
Wow. That's, I love it. I can actually see you.
I burned the boat. I burned it and I smashed it. I was serious. I was like, not having it. And then I bought myself a ring. I have this little ring, and it has 3 little things on it to remind myself that I would never like put my kids in that situation ever again.
Oh man, that is absolutely powerful. I love it. Pam?
Yeah, mine was the Summer of Brokenness, and I'm sitting on my quiet time chair, and I had probably had more than a few days where I couldn't get off the chair. And I just thought to myself, I am not living. I am dying with my child.
Wow.
I am not going to die with him. And it was a spiritual death. It was a death of, desperation. And I'm like, I believe there's a verse in the Bible, John 10:10, it says that he came to give us abundant life. And I was like, this is not abundant life. Like, I am not living in abundance, and that is not the promise. And so I'm going to figure out today how to live that promise. And I knew intrinsically that if I changed the way I lived, that people around me would change as well. And I was like, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to let this disease kill me and kill my family and kill my son.
Ooh, man, you guys had 2 powerful burning boat moments.
Right. Very powerful. But I did have a moment in my therapist's office to piggyback on what Pam said about changing for her family, where my therapist said, if you want to break this cycle in your family, it's going to have to start with your kids. And I said, you know what? I don't think so. I think it has to start with me. I think it has to start with me so that it will break for my children. Yeah. And so that was another layer of why I thought, you know what, the rest of the generations, if I have to stop drinking or whatever I have to do to make it so they don't suffer this, or my daughters don't have kids that have substance use issues, or my son, I would do anything for them not to have that.
I have to be the change.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. Interesting how the therapist would say that. Very interesting. Okay, so tell us about an aha moment in your life when you realized you were now moving in the right direction. Go ahead, Pam.
I don't know if I could really pinpoint an actual aha moment, but the day in Sedona that I mentioned earlier, where I didn't confront Jake, it wasn't icky, it was a very good day. And then the next day, he called and said, I need detox. Mm-hmm. Like, I knew that was exactly what it was all about. Like that our family was a safe place, that my relationship with my son had become such a safe place that he could reach out to me anytime and say, I need help. Right? Like, that to me is the epitome of what we're trying to accomplish in our families. Like Shelly said, where you're holding that container and you carry your kids' hearts or your, important people's hearts in your hands, and it's like having an egg in their hand, and you're not squashing the egg, right? Like, you're holding that, and it's precious and it's beautiful, and it's all in one piece.
Absolutely. That is a spectacular aha moment, a spiritual awakening. It's a beautiful moment where you recognize that something dramatically different is happening and it's all good.
Yeah.
That's an aha moment. I love it. All right, Shelly.
Well, I wrote in my journal sometime during that year, like, how will I know that this is happening? You know, how will I know? And I put some conditions down, or some markers, I guess would be the word, that so I would recognize it and remember, like, this is happening. So one of them was when my son started saying things like about his sobriety, you know, and me hearing him say it. So I was like, this is really happening. Like, he's choosing this. It isn't for us. This isn't about us. He's choosing this, and him saying things like, you know, I know all the good things that are coming to me are because I'm sober, you know, and he's got some really good things coming down the pike. And so that's one of them. And then just the way I feel in my everywhere, you know, like, I feel different. So that moment when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not on high alert anymore. Like, my neck doesn't hurt from hovering above the pillow, ready to jump, you know, into action. And I think this might not sound very humble, but the most affirming moment is when Google asked me to help Google asked me, how do we help families better? And I was like, that's like the thing Google's supposed to Google. So when Google asks you, what can we do? Then I was like, that I'm doing the right things now, if that's what's happening.
Google reached out to you?
I met some people at Google, and they said, can you help us with, you know, help families better? I just thought that was funny, you know, like Google asked me, what do we do? And I said to them, like, you were my first responder, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to you like every bit of the way. You were my first responder. So
that's a pretty big aha moment.
Yeah.
That's
like,
pretty big aha.
This is all happening. Yeah. Yeah. I found my purpose. Yeah.
All right. So for family members that are listening, what are the resources that you would recommend to them, book-wise or any other resources?
Besides Thrive Family Support and the Family Recovery Conference.
There we
Besides
go.
those two things, which, you know, they're innovative in the way that we speak and respond and everything. I would say the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, because they have some free resources that are really based in kindness and science, evidence-based practices. So that would be one. If I was to recommend a book, I would recommend the book that Pam recommended to me, which is The Anatomy of Peace, and The Four Agreements. Those two books, I think, are very powerful in understanding where somebody, you know, how to relate. So The Four Agreements is great on how to relate with people overall, and The Anatomy of Peace is a really eye-opening, heart-opening way of responding to a loved one with substance use disorder.
Beautiful, beautiful. Pam, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I would agree. Partnership for Drug-Free Kids is it's a really good website. And, you know, if you're a person of faith, there's a couple books I love. And one is called Keep Your Love On, and it's written by Danny Silk. And the other one is called Everybody Always, and it's by Bob Goff. He's a really popular author now. And, you know, it's like, love everybody always, right? I love anything by Brene Brown. So, you know, her stuff on boundaries, her stuff on being vulnerable, shame. I mean, some of those actually some of those philosophies of hers and how she communicates them really has shaped the way I work with clients more than anything, and just her belief on intrinsic value. Her last book was so good. She talks about how we file people into categories, right? And we put a label on that person, and so then we create that story in our head about who that person is, and we validate that story. And so I think at any time we can kind of move away or recognize, right, that we have created this story and that our behaviors are validating it, and, and especially in a negative way. And we can stop and say, wait a minute, like I need to change that story. I think that's really what happens in the cycle of chaos and addiction, is that we create this story, right, of what we think about a person who has addiction or about what the disease looks like. I mean, there's so many more people that live in the disease of addiction that never steal, hardly ever, never lie, like give the shirt off their back to another person, function at work on a daily basis. I mean, there's a lot of people that have substance use disorder that really don't come close to fitting into the stereotypical stories that we tell about people with addiction. And so, I love her writings because I think it helps us step out of the story that we're creating, and then we have the power to create a new story.
Yeah.
And Pam is an author too, so let's not forget, if we're going to suggest books, especially faith-based books, praying your loved one home. Praying your loved one home.
And I write a lot, and so if you follow me on Facebook, you're going to get like a good dose all the time of stuff, like really, I think, pretty powerful thought.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And our conference Facebook page is Foundations for Family Recovery.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. All right. God, I was about to say something. Oh, no. Whenever I recommend or whenever Brene Brown comes up, it's always like all things Brene Brown. Like you really cannot go wrong. Just Google her. And she just did you watch the Netflix special?
Yes, it's so good.
Yeah. She's just phenomenal. My first introduction to her was the Power of Vulnerability, the TEDx talk that she did.
I really want to meet her someday. She's my girl crush.
She's my girl crush. I want to meet her too. She's incredible. Seriously. Yeah. All right. So, we got to cut this short. Okay. So I hate to do this though. Give me your most powerful I am statements. Shelly, what are your 3 most powerful I am statements?
I am well. I am peaceful. I am powerful.
Love it. Pam?
Yeah. I am powerful. I am loving. And I am kind.
Love it. See, yeah, I hate going over that one.
I'm going to switch that one too. Actually, Shelly and I, we have 4 because we're both the same. This is the same. I am a warrior.
Yes.
Yeah. Have that on my tattoo.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys have matching I am warrior tattoos?
No, mine doesn't say that, but I'm going to that's going to be my mine says hope. So.
Well, I love it. I love it. Okay, so what is one parting piece of wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners? Okay, Pam, you go first. No, Shelly was about to go.
Go ahead, Shelly.
No, go first.
I would just say you do have power. You have the power to change lives. And you can walk in abundance, joy, and peace, right? Regardless of your circumstances.
Love it. Shelly?
I'd say, number 1, reach out for help from somebody who's been there and is, in recovery or has a recovery mindset. But the most important pieces of all of this is communication and connection and emotional regulation. And those are the foundations. So, get connected, communicate, get yourself into a place of calm, and ask for help. Like, ask for help.
Okay, I have to piggyback on this one last thing. 23 million people in the United States are in long-term recovery. Why not your son? Why not your daughter?
Why not you?
Your husband? Why not you?
Why not your family?
Right? So why not?
Why not? Why not? It's going to change your life. It's going to change your life.
Oh my gosh, it's the best thing that ever happened, because at the beginning of this, you said, what did it cost you? And I didn't even go there. I was like, and then this happened, right? I forgot to even say like what it cost, because it gave it, like, recovery gave us so much. Like, that's over.
It's true. It's true. We could go into all kinds of tangents of what it costs us. It costs us so much, but at the flip side, the price we paid for admission is worth it, because without suffering there is no story. Without struggle there is no story. Without everything that we've endured, we cannot give on such a high level. We had to endure the suffering that the path that we had forced us to recover, to change, to learn, to grow. And then through that, we're now able to give back and contribute on a much higher level. So it needed to happen.
Yeah.
I'm grateful
I looked at my son the other day and I said, the greatest gift that we've ever received is the gift of your addiction.
Incredible.
Like, really? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I am right where I'm supposed to be for such a time as this, because of the experiences that we've had for our family.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the way, that is the way of looking at it, because, without it, we cannot help others.
Right.
We had to learn to help ourselves first. And then now we are recovery warriors.
Yeah.
Agents of change. All right, Pam, Shelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. We could talk for like 2 more years, I think. This was so fun. Thank you.
We could have literally, like, I was watching the clock going, man, I gotta stop this where we're at, because we gotta stop here because I got other questions. And we could go on for days on this one.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Omar, for having us. You're doing great work. We appreciate you.
Well, you ladies are doing incredible work, and not for nothing, but this is one of those episodes I get asked about. It's the family member one. Like, what resources are out there for family members, right? And so I need this as much as my community does, right? Because they need access to family wellness.
Yeah.
So here it is.
We agree.
All right.
Thank you.
Here it is. Here it is.
All right, ladies, we've now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida. Shelly, say pura vida.
Pura vida.
Pam?
Pura vida.
Beautiful. And that's a wrap.